Is Tarnished Silver Bullets. Yeah, Wolfgang Gorlick. A couple quick things about me. I head up the CBI Academy, which is by far my favorite part of my job, where all the junior analysts report to me for 90 days and then have a bat signal to me for 2 years as I mentor them through the program. It's an apprenticeship program for our analysts. Love that. We've got about 30 people involved in it right now. Fantastic. We have people who are like, last job was waitress or someone at Gander Mountain, and now they're in the trenches doing fantastic security work. I also head up the strategic programs practice, where someone will say, hey, I've got a program, incident response program, business continuity program, disaster recovery program, software development, security program, whatever it is. And they're like, what do we do now? I've got all the toys, got all the boxes, now what? So I come in and talk with the senior folks about how to address those things. I do tweet, I do boring YouTube videos that you guys can see if you want. And true story, I once drank holy water. So I was in a mountain with my girlfriend, and I had mentioned I always wanted, like, holy water sounds great, right? So we climbed this mountain, and this hills is shrouded, and there's monks, and it wasn't sacrilegious at all, but she's like, you can have some holy water, and there's a little stream. And I'm like, great. All I had was 5-hour energy bottles, right? So I filled some up with holy water. Fast forward 2 months later, I'm dead tired. I'm out of coffee at the apartment because I travel way too much. I'm like, oh, 5-hour energy. About halfway through, I realized my mistake. This does not taste caffeinated, but I might as well finish it because I never was really clear. If you do half a sin, are you still in trouble? So I finished the holy water. So two things with that. Either one, I'm going to hell, and I hope to see a lot of you with me. Or two, if vampires hit Converge, I got your back. I'll go first, because I'm protected. I also figured that was a great analogy for some security control, so we'll get back to the vampires in a little bit. But really, this talk is all about encryption. And it's always so easy to do encryption, right? You simply identify your data assets. I love every single white paper that says, to do encryption, step 1, identify data assets. Has anyone identified all their data assets? No, that's like months or years. I was talking to a CISO, they're like, yeah, we've got 2,000 cloud projects, and I've got visibility into 50. And of those 50, I know the data in 1. Great. But let's pretend just for a minute it's easy to do that. Step 2 is assess the threats. One of the reasons I got involved with MySec, one of the reasons I got involved with Converge Detroit was because I was a security officer in a financial services firm. Because as a security officer in a financial services firm, I didn't know what the threats were. And I was hearing about how all the bad guys were going to get me. And I had this great idea. What if I just invited them to my place? Just hang out and see what happens. And they came and started messing with my stuff. I'm like, there's the threat. Did you guys find my data? Yeah, we found the stuff. Great. Write that down. Now once you do that, we protect encrypt, right? Protect encrypt. Easy stuff. Sounds really simple, but so oftentimes it's not, right? When we actually do this, it doesn't work right. When we actually go ahead and follow these processes, we miss things. And no security talk ever would be complete without the big scary graph of how many breaches there are. So I'll get to that in just a minute, because you hear things like, we're encrypting, we're absolutely fine. I see the lock in my browser. We're encrypting, we're absolutely fine. We got BitLocker, we're protected. And you're like, okay, that's good, BitLocker, web browser, awesome. Have you seen the breaches recently, right? None of these guys went, oh, I would have been saved if I had BitLocker. It would have been fine if I just had that little lock in my browser. So you start to figure out, where does encryption go wrong? Why has it become tarnished? Why, if we have the silver bullet, is it not stopping those werewolves? And one of the main reasons is because it's misplaced, right? We put it in the wrong layer, we put it in the wrong spot, or we misconfigure it, and we share the keys out, and then we get hacked. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Another thing is, fundamentally in security, we're trying to protect the organization by protecting the IT that enables it to do its mission, right? And so oftentimes when we're talking about any control, we don't have a really good process to figure out what of all this massive amount of stuff that's going on, 2,000 web projects or cloud projects, really is contributing to the business, what it really matters to them. So talk a little bit about that. And finally, and this is a point that I've been really, really struggling with. And one of the reasons why I was excited about Wendy's keynote, thank you again for that, that was great, was, all right, so we have a budget. How should we spend this budget? Right? Where should those budget priorities go? Where should the money be spent to really protect and prevent? And I think it's at the intersection of what the criminal wants to steal and what's worth to them, and the intersection of what the IT is actually generating for the business, right? So if the company makes $1 off this, but it's worth being broken to, to a thief at $2, should we protect at $1 or $2? And where's the intersection of those two things? So I'm really, truly obsessed with that part of it. Absolutely, fundamentally obsessed with that part of it. This talk is about encryption and using some techniques I've been doing. Don't even worry about it. I'll get back. I promise. You'll go nuts, man. It's all good. This talk is about how do I get to that intersection? How do I do it? And how do I do it with something, just one control? If I try to do all controls, we'll all go nuts, right? And we won't have enough time at Converge and be like, is Wolf still talking about what he's obsessed about? Yes, he is. How do we just do one thing? So let's pick encryption. Let's talk through this. I'm going to tell you where I am at now. Hopefully it'll spark some ideas. Hopefully it'll give you some good takeaways. And hopefully someone will come up to me and go, you know that one thing? I kind of solved that. You know that one thing? You probably didn't think about this, but our organization does it that way. You know that one thing that you're obsessed about? Stop it. Chocolate is okay on parfait. We'll get there, right? And that's what Converge is about, I think, is good conversations afterwards around these topics. So interrupt me anytime, please hit me up. All right, let's start with protecting and preventing. Specifically protecting the business. How do we actually get to what matters to the business? One of the main ways that we look at doing it, right, is not the normal audit way. My guys like to mess with me. You probably picked that up through my introduction. And one of the things they always like to needle me is that, oh, here's Wolf. He's the auditor. I'll introduce Wolf, the auditor. And I'm like, not the auditor. I'm here to help the CISO avoid the auditor. And the CISO's like, here's our friend the auditor. I'm like, you're killing me. So not the normal audit way. Because anytime you do an audit, you end up with this great risk ranking, and it looks something like this. Our risk goes somewhere from, man, it's bad, to its findings, I'm going to stare at you blankly till you go away. Right? This is so oftentimes the result. And how do you act on that? What does any of that mean? Right? What's the difference between as if at a low and at a medium? I don't know. But I think we've all seen reports that say, thou shalt implement technology X using a great graph like this. I want to get a little bit closer, a little more granular. I want to put dollars to it. One of the ways I like to do that is through business impact analysis, right? Which is where you start with your critical business activities. And then you go ahead and say, okay, what technology actually enables that? What people enable that? What are the people doing with that technology, and why does it matter to the business? Then you go ahead and calculate the value, and you estimate the value to the organization if it's disrupted. This is a fundamental concept in business continuity and disaster recovery, and it's a great way to have some conversation with the business folks to say, what do you do? And what happens, right, when you're done with your stuff? What servers are you really using when you're doing that thing, right? And then figure out, okay, that accounts for 1/3 of our business. If that was to go down because we got a denial of service, maybe we got a problem. Or someone sits down and they're like, you know what? I do my job. I love my job. It's a great job. If my job wasn't done for 2 weeks, no one's going to care. You're like, cool. I don't have to scare you. Thank you. I can spend my money elsewhere. One of the things that always comes out of this is the great difference in certain people's perspectives, right? Because they hear a term and they don't necessarily know what it is. So, for example, with the executive leadership, sometimes they're like, I know we're secure, we've got encryption, I've heard the word encryption, we must be safe. And it's not just executives, we all do this. I'll give you a good example. This happened just the other day, actually last week. Heard about a movie. I was going to go watch a movie with my girlfriend and our 2 kids. And she's like, we should watch this movie. And I'm like, what are the list of movies you want to watch? And she's like, da-da-da. And one was like Lego Batman. You want to see Lego Batman? Yeah, I heard that's good. Watch that one, not the one I saw. And the one she listed was like right under Lego Batman. And then the kids are talking, right, in the other room, and I'm making breakfast. It's Sunday morning. I like to make pancakes, so I'm making pancakes and washing dishes and everything. And they're talking about Boss Baby. Anyone see Boss Baby? Is that one good?
Yes.
Okay, I haven't seen that one. So I've heard Boss Baby and I've heard Lego Batman in both contexts, this movie that we're about to see. And then I heard my daughter go, well, yeah, I don't really like animation. I'm like, all right, probably an animated movie, probably comedy, right? And again, this is like exactly the mindset. I've heard two things. And the movie was Zookeeper's Wife. Anyone heard of this? Okay, so those of you who have, where were you 2 weeks ago so you could have warned me? Did you see it or like it? Okay. I'm not going to spoil it for the rest of you guys because it gets better. Zookeeper's Wife. I said, and I quote, I like zoos. I like wives. I'm in for this movie. And my daughter looked at me kind of funny. She's like, you're in? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, maybe it's that, I'm thinking, was it like the Kevin James movie, Zookeeper? Right? Maybe he got a wife. Maybe it's a sequel. I'm thinking, maybe it's like Zootopia. Right? So I get in, and there's like all these old people. I'm like the young one in the room. And I'm usually called the Grandpa Mysek, because I'm usually the old one in the room. I'm like, why am I the young? This is like animated movie? Yeah, no, it's not animated. I'm like, all right, well, at least it's a comedy, right? Well, I'm waiting for Kevin James. And it starts as a period piece. It's 1940s. And here's this wife, and she's riding along on this bicycle, and there's a camel following her, and it's all this fun stuff. And next thing you know, they shot the camel. And then there were Nazis. And there's like an entire Nazi movie. And my daughter's crying, and my girlfriend's crying, and I've got the popcorn, and I've got my little like Moscow Mule, and I'm like, just wanted a fun weekend movie. And I'm like, I go to my daughter, I'm like, why didn't you tell me? I said, I like zoos and I like wives. You could have warned me. I said Nazis. Like, ugh. She goes, well, I thought you knew. And we always think we know. Every single time I'm in an office building, right, high rise, and I turn to the CEO, and I'm like, or the CISO, and we're like, are you secure? He's like, yeah, we've got zoos and we got wives. I'm like, yeah, we're secure. and then we turn to the director in the next meeting, he's like, so about that thing. Yeah, it really doesn't work. We got BitLocker, but everyone knows the keys. We get HTTPS, but it's the wrong version of TLS. Yes, it's AES encrypted, but we're really using kind of like the key is everywhere, and all the developers have it. Right? Never reality. But this is the way that most people go through the world. You hear one thing and you move forward. So we have to get down to how the business really works. Simple business impact analysis, we usually describe it and define it with a diagram this simple, right? Here's the facilities you need, here's the technology you need, here's the people you need, and then we tag a dollar value to it. This particular process contributes $3 million to your bottom line every single year. If it gets disrupted, it's $100,000 a week. And then we can have a great conversation about how are we going to stop $100,000 from being lost a week versus, Mr. Manufacturer guy, you've got a CVE on your ICS thing. We have to patch it. I know it's Windows XP, right? And the guy's like, get out of my office. So business impact analysis. Next thing we do is data flow analysis, which is document the flow for the business process, develop the IT system, map out, right? Go down one level and map out that IT. And then start showing what we need to protect and prevent. PCI DSS loves this, so does HIPAA. Every time you hear cardholder data environment, this is what I'm talking about. You map out your data flow, and you show how the data moves throughout the system. Because when we know how that data is moving, right, when we know how the carriages are getting to the castles, we can then figure out how we need to protect those routes. When we don't have that visibility, we have to protect all the acreage, right? The route versus the acreage, a lot different when you're trying to focus in your security spend and your controls. So we do this with PCI all the time. We do this with HIPAA all the time. I'm going to pick on Paul because Paul's in the audience. I was at RSA, and I was in an Uber at RSA, which is always fun going through San Francisco traffic. And I get a text message. Paul texts me all the time. He's like, guess what I found? I got good news and bad news. I'm like, okay. He's like, you know that conversation where they said everything was fine? I know where this is going. He goes, yeah, it's not fine. It's like I was sitting down with the controller, and you know that they're like, here's the data flow, and it's all in this folder. And I said, yeah? And he goes, can you get to that folder? No, that folder's secure. All right, so I'm on guest Wi-Fi. Could I get to the folder? Absolutely not. What UNC is it? Boink. And it all opened up, right? It was like everyone had full access to it, because some IT guy went, we may need this on the guest network, and oh, by the way, you're having permissions, I'll set it to everyone, read it right. Whew. All the financial records in there. Great. But these are the types of things that a good discussion and a good data flow analysis can discover. Because the people are going to think, I like zoos, I like wives. And of course it's secure because the IT guy told me. Until you type and you just look, right? This allows us to figure out where to look, though, which is really the key point. Because you're trying to look at everything, you can't focus on anything. Simple data flow analysis looks something like this. Shows some of the components. In this example, we've got, a storefront, we've got online shopping, some firewalls to get back to our point of sale system, to our card processor, and a back-end data warehouse. The key thing here is getting a different slice of it and beginning to check those components. Now, once we have that, we have the business diagram, we have the data flow analysis. That's when I argue we should do a control analysis, right? Then we look at the specific technical controls on an IT system. A couple things about that. One is, anyone ever do a capability maturity assessment, right? And you get asked, the critical security controls says, thou shalt do data loss prevention on all perimeter devices for classified data, right? And you're like, okay, do you do that? And you're thinking to yourself, I kind of do. I do over here, do it over there. And they just give you one option, like yes or no, or yes and sorta and no. And you treat every single technology the same, right? When we get to something like the expense and depth that Wendy mentioned, it's usually because we're trying to protect everything with that same control and that same broad brush. If we instead say, okay, here's what really matters to the business, and here's how that data flows, here's those supporting data systems, let's just look at those controls. We can get a much more granular view into it. Moreover, what's really important about this is then we don't say, okay, let's pick controls, something easy, like let's do the combination of ISO 27002 and NIST 53. That should be simple, right? No, just like what are the key things that we really need to worry about that would really move the needle? For us, when we look at encryption, we look at the following ones. These controls were taken from, we basically did a cross-section of every standard with my GRC team and got a whole big long list. And then I went to my incident response team and said, okay, people get all the time, everyone who gets hacked, has encryption. What do you see they do wrong? And we got a whole big list. And I went to our red team and said, okay, how are you tricking people? And our red team would tell us we had to phish them. No, we got our red team to tell us that as well, and we started putting all this together. So protecting network traffic, of course, is one. Active data and files is another. That active data both in the application itself and as the files move out through the network. Another one is the data at rest and system storage, BitLocker, if you will. The applications in use, which is, so example, if you've got a point of sale system, does it have that credit card decrypted in memory? So if you're sniffing the memory, could you grab it and get it out of there? And then are the databases protected? Are we managing our keys? We'll get back to that in a minute. Authorization and authentication. Are you doing things like two-factor? Are you protecting with OAuth? Are you doing the right things in that layer? And then finally, do you have an entire program that checks all this and makes sure that the right pieces are in the right place, and that as the business changes, you're adjusting those plans to the business, and that as you're doing these things, you're actually making sure that you're still using the right versions of encryption and what have you. So we came up with the following 8 levels of controls, right? Not a million. 20 is a pretty good number. Critical security controls is 20, all right? Not even that many. Really, really narrow just for around the maturity of one particular product. Now, for each control, we want to look at something very simple. And that's this, right? Do we have it? Do they have a standard? Do they know what they're doing? For example, it's something around wireless encryption. Are they regularly auditing? Are they doing it? Next is doing the thing, right? So do you know what to do? Are you doing the thing? And then do you have a way in place so that the people who are doing the thing know what they're supposed to do, right? So don't just do the thing, but do the thing to make sure that you're doing the thing, and then do the thing to make sure that when you did the thing that it really was done right. So oftentimes what I find when we implement technology, and we heard this on the panel yesterday, right? Yeah, we buy all these products, and then we implement maybe 30% of them, 30% of the features, and the rest of the features just sit there. And then the features we have, we don't necessarily have people to make sure that that's still implemented correctly or stays in place, or the setting is done right. And so we want to make sure we've got a process in place that we're continuously going back and looking at these things, making sure it's still in place and still functional and still holding up to the real threat. All right? A couple reasons for that is, one, encryption settings do not age well, right? Whatever encryption you have, it's going to roll off. It's going to get old. TLS is my favorite example of this, but everyone does, right? Encryption is all around the math. The math is good. How do you break encryption? You get faster computers. Funny thing, every year we have faster computers, so we have to go back and check that encryption. The other thing too is that new ways of bypassing and getting around are constantly being found. So multi-factor is a good example. A lot of people implemented their own multi-factor, and then attackers realized, hey, you're using only a 6-digit code, you're not checking for brute force. I can use brute forcing on your 1 through 1111 to 99999 until I figure out your code and get in. We start to see people who that type of multi-factor homebrew 10 years ago was great. They haven't checked it, they haven't thought about it, because do I have multi-factor? Yes, I check the box every single year. I must be safe. I like zoos and I like wives. The other thing is maturity assessments measure the feeling, right? There's always that deeper reality. There's this concept of the feeling of security versus the reality of security. One of the things I was doing, and it was not an audit, is I was having a conversation with a client about business impact analysis, right? We're going through that exercise. And they had me at like the 20th floor of a high-rise at sunrise, facing east with my back to the sun with the blinds open. And so as the people were coming in, they're squinting into me. I'm like, this is great. And then one of the lead guys was like standing behind me a little bit, like this. Like, I feel like I'm in like one of those mafia movies. Like, you come to me, you must tell me your sins, and I will tell you how to correct the security. And of course, everyone there is like, our security is fine, sir. Thank you for asking. I really appreciate this. Can I get back to my desk? Everything's A-okay, right? And so you have to switch it up and have those conversations again and find different ways. We very quickly realized it was a bad way to have that meeting and changed it up. But it's getting to a deeper reality and then actually doing the technical testing, which is another thing so many people don't do. All right? And all that takes effort, which is why so oftentimes we don't do it. Because it takes a lot of time to get all those pieces in place and to do all those things. How am I doing on time? 10:23? Cool. All right. So, protecting the business looks something like this. Identify the critical business activities. We figure out their data and we map it out for the data flow. We figure out the IT and we map that out in IT infrastructure diagrams. And then we define those controls, selective controls, specific controls, and we assess it. We assess it through conversation, multiple conversations, and once we have a good sense of what their sense is of the security, we technically test the controls that really matter. And we test them to see, are they sufficient? Are they working? And if they're not, what does that mean? Does it matter that it's not working? Or does that fact it's not working allow us to completely bypass the security? So that's the protect side, right? What are we trying to protect? Before I get to prevent, anyone have any questions or anything they want to add? Throw at me. Cool. All right, let's talk about preventing the threats. Number one way to prevent threats is to take your data center, do an open house, and invite MySec in. Nothing will happen. You'll learn lots. Your coffee pot may start blinking weird error codes at you, and your badges may be cloned, which is another thing I found out 10 years ago when we've had people in for an open house. But no. Prevent threats, right? The first thing is, what is it we're actually looking to prevent? What is the real thing? And if you start with identifying the threat actor, and again, figuring out who really matters, I think it's an easier conversation. So oftentimes, these are the ones we think about, right? The script kiddies or the lone actors, the ones who are out there for their ego, trying to prove a point, the ones that will ping me on IRC channels from periodically with cool names using elite speak and say, I found a vulnerability in your website. Like, yes, you did, because I'm running WordPress. I paid for that vulnerability. But that's where we start, right? And that's usually the hacker that we all have in mind with the hoodie and everything and what have you. The next one is the insider threat. These are the guys actually that scare me the most, is the insider threat. Did you guys see the insider trading scandal about 6 months ago? Because what was happening was on one of the dark web sites, which is another one of my favorite neologisms right now, the dark web. There was a website that was paying people in financial services, paying investors, insiders, right? Malicious insiders who didn't like their company. And it was pitched as, get back at your company, because those employers don't like you, so you might as well make a buck off of them. Get back at your company, we'll pay you in Bitcoin if you give us access to your systems. And these guys were selling data, and then that data was being packaged up and used for insider trading, right, to game the stock market. Really, really scary stuff. And again, the insiders are the ones we need to be afraid of. To Wendy's point, right? A sufficiently successful attacker looks just like an insider. I love that quote, by the way. And how do you know? You have no idea, because insider threat is very, very hard to detect. Next one's hacktivists. I love these guys, anonymous, group actors. They're driven by a cause. They're trying to break into your system for a reason. When Op Wall Street happened, we had the reverse. We had a guy who was on the IRC channel with Anonymous, and he was feeding information to the rest of us, like, hey, Bank of America, are you on? Yeah, we're on. They're about to get you next. Okay, good. And I sat there like, I'm ready. Come on. Take me in. And they didn't go after me, so I was okay. Guess I didn't have enough money. But Anonymous, cyber criminals is the last one, right? The organized crime, the financially motivated guys. And these cyber criminals are the largest, fastest growing segment. Cybercrime has now exceeded drug crime in terms of annual revenue. So, well-funded, well-motivated. Ransomware, what have you. And then finally the nation states, right? Russia hacks us, no they don't. China hacks us, no they don't. We hack everyone else, I didn't say that. But those nation state APTs and everything else we hear about all the time in marketing literature. So when you think about it, when trying to map the business and transition to the threats, right? And when you're up at night wondering what's going to get me, and you're sitting there wondering where are the bad guys coming from, where's the attack coming from, is my firewall right, is my security controls in place, they said that they can't get to that folder and open Wi-Fi, can they get to that folder and open Wi-Fi? I think it's helpful to stop and look at where a lot of the attacks are coming from. So this following research was from 2016, looking at active reported breaches and the percentage of those breaches by source. Nation state, only 4%, not as much as we would have thought. Insider threat, 4.2%, way below what we thought, which makes me think it's probably being underreported. Hacktivists, 11.3%, right? 11.3% of the time that they're getting attacked, that's a hacktivist, it's anonymous, who's defacing a website or doing something. A big chunk, but if you look at what they're doing, it's usually not something that directly impacts business operations, which is good. Although there are now food manufacturers who are very concerned that PETA-like groups will get in and turn off HVAC systems. You guys saw my food fight, that was one of the threat models we were very concerned about, is these folks using vulnerabilities in the processing system to make a point. To date, we're not seeing that, thankfully. The great majority of it, 80% cybercrime, right? 80% of all the breaches last year driven by cybercrime. So that's what it is. Now, what's interesting about this, back to zoos and wives for a minute. In Paris, a rhino was poached. Did you guys see this news? They broke into a Paris zoo. Paris is a lovely city. Who's going to break into a zoo? They broke into a Paris zoo, and they took the horn from one of the prize rhinos. And when I first saw that, I'm like, why would you do that? It's something you would think would be like, in Africa or maybe not necessarily in a major metropolitan area, something that would be maybe a little more high risk for crime. I mean, who's going to go after a rhino horn? And it was really bothering me, so I looked into it a little bit further. Rhino horns, sold on the deep dark web with Bitcoin. Rhino horns go for $25,000 an ounce right now, right? $25,000 an ounce. The price of that horn on the black market was roughly $350,000 US. Here's a zoo with a rhino. If you would replace that rhino with $350,000 in gold, do you think they would have just had a regular fence around that with maybe CCTV in distance? No. But these people are thinking about, here's a rhino, we're going to protect and care for the rhino like a rhino. Very much the same thing happens within our organizations. We've got this great asset to a criminal that's worth of $250,000 that to us is just data. If you look at Anthem, the Anthem breach, I calculated that out and looked at the price in the open market for that data. Over $4 billion if they got full market value. $4 billion. If they knew that they had $4 billion in one database, would they have protected the same way? Right? When you start thinking about what cybercrime does and what it means to the criminal versus it means to us, it gives you a different lens to figure out where we should be putting our security controls and our security spend. And I personally find that very fascinating, which is again why I'm obsessed with this. How do we figure that out? One of the things we can look at, hey, where does the organization generate value, which we already talked about, and then where are the criminals financially motivated to attack? Some prices on the open market is $10 for credit cards right now. Why? Doesn't it seem low? Whenever I say that, someone's like, only $10? They can send my credit card at $10? Yes, because everyone and their brother's credit cards have been stolen. So supply and demand, that prices went way down. Personal identity, $20. Again, huge lot of it right now. The most valuable personal health information, $60 per health record. Down from 100. Again, because of the breaches going on. But at 100 or 60, you got a lot of people with a lot of rhinos. And we're just thinking, well, what's the big deal? It's just some health information. The security controls we need to put in place are much, much different, depending on what the people are motivated to do. Any questions on that before I go forward? Yeah, hit me. Do you want to take that?
Sure. So if you look at healthcare fraud, the value of the information is stuff that can be used for medical fraud locally. So people are bringing information, being able to quickly up fake insurance cards or otherwise using that information to free that care. Also, they often include financial needs. So like the medical record. Quite often there's a social security number, name, address, all that. So the health information, just in that right there, fraud is very valuable. And then also, it's a big batch that might include VIP. The VIPs in that setting might be very valuable as well. So there's kind of a process there with personally identifiable.
Yeah, because PHI includes PII plus. Absolutely. So when we do a threat assessment, one of the things we do is once we look at this system and its value, we look at the number of records in that, and we multiply by those values to figure out what the price is in the open market and how we should be protecting against it. And then we go back to our movie monsters and who we should be afraid of. When we start doing that, we start getting closer to threat modeling, right? Identifying the likely threat actors. We're going to talk about criminals for the rest of this talk, but insert threat actor here. Identify your likely assets. Again, we're going to focus more on credit cards and health information for the rest of this talk because that's what the criminals are stealing. Insert your data here. If you're intellectual property and you're worried about China, it's going to be a different model. Identifying the vulnerabilities. Not every vulnerability, not scanning everything. Identifying the vulnerabilities in the IT that enables the business function that we're trying to protect that has that sensitive data, right? So working all the way down to the data, then all the way back up to that business process. And then, here's the key thing, filter intelligence and news by things that relate to all this, right? Start straining out our threat intelligence so it's threat intelligence that's actually likely and realistic for what we're trying to protect. This last one is hugely important because there's no way in hell that we can keep up on all the news. I gave up years ago. There's just too much of it out there. Moreover, when we start to have conversations, if we don't have a good filter here, here's what ends up happening. You know, any number of things could happen with this organization, this health information. I agree. We're in the cloud. I like the cloud too. And when we start protecting it, one of the things we have to think about is good locks, right? What's the equivalent of good locks on the cloud? And they're like, you know what I heard is that sometimes you can clone door badges. I'm like, yes, you can. And then I heard, did you hear that there's a ransomware attack that took out a hotel and locked everyone out? Absolutely, I heard that. Yeah, so what if that happened here? I'm like, yeah, it could totally happen here. But that's not where the data is. The data's in the cloud. You know what I mean? And you can start to worry about all these different threats and vectors that really are real threats and vectors. Yeah, at some point in time, we should think about the physical controls and make sure no one holds ransom our building. But is that the most likely and is that the most impactful? So A, for threat intelligence, that's that. B, it's the anchor points, right? When we get to threat modeling, without a good idea of what vulnerabilities there are in the system, it's very difficult to know what the anchor points are that a red teamer or a pen tester or a criminal would use to scale your walls. By starting with the vulnerabilities and the idea of what the system is, and then applying the threat model based on that, it's a little bit backwards, but it allows you to build a much more accurate map of what the criminals would actually do if they're trying to circumvent your defenses. Because you know where they're going to avoid because it's strong, and you know where you're going to go because it's weak. That make sense? Cool. All right, second part about threat modeling. Take one of those threats that's realistic, build that attack lifecycle, each one of the tactics that they're going to follow, right? Each one of those anchor points now they're going to get through your system. Identify the existing controls that would, because they're not there, allow that attack to happen, or because they are there, would prevent it and move the attacker elsewhere. I'm going to repeat that last sentence because it's important. If the control is there, it's going to move the attacker elsewhere, right? All attacks are like a dam. It just, the water moves. So we want to figure out, okay, once the control's in place, great, that doesn't stop the attack, what else are they going to do? Identify those controls, and then begin to design threat-specific encryption use cases. Now, I'm just talking about encryption today. Any control can be substituted in there, right? I'm just talking about cybercrime today. Any threat actor could be substituted in there. But at this point in time, what you're trying to do is figure out the one control, such as encryption, that can be applied in a very threat-specific way to address those other things we covered. Now, I like to think about this in terms of flow. So this is a very simple threat modeling exercise. This is probably the easiest way of threat modeling that you'll see. It's very quick and easy. I still got to catch your talk on the new Microsoft tool. But as I was talking earlier, vampires, right? We could be hit. Werewolves happens all the time. Just the other day. So if you start to think about what a vampire or werewolf would do, obviously a vampire is going to go after our friends and family. That's no good. Again, I've got your back. Holy water. Werewolves, well, hell, they do terrible damage whenever you let them in the castle. As the data is going back and forth to our defenses, they could affect that. And of course, they're going to mess with our friends and family. So when we start layering on controls, holy water, silver bullets, stake to the heart and walls, we can then begin to look at how these things would be stopped by these particular controls. And when I get forward, I'm going to use this exact same paradigm to show different encryption where it would stop attacks. So of course, vampire is stopped by stakes and holy water. And good walls. Can never have enough good walls. And the wolves buy everything else, including the walls. Silver bullets in here. So if you're trying to figure out, all right, I've got a 50-50 probability of a werewolf attack or a vampire attack, and all these assets are equally valuable to me. Please don't tell me that you place your castle on your family, but if you do, that's okay. All these assets are of equal value. Which of these controls are most cost effective? This is a very quick visual way to say, okay, a good wall will stop a lot of things. Maybe we need perimeter security, right? It's a very simple way to begin to figure out which one of the controls would have a disproportionate stopping power for this threat. We call this threat flow. And within threat flow, we use an API from Google. Sand key diagrams is what we're using to generate. So as you see the diagrams, they're sand key diagrams. You can get it off Google if you Google sand key diagram API. You can get all the documentation and create your own. There's other visualization tools out there, of course. Excel, I love Excel. Excel doesn't have sand key diagrams, which kills me. So we use Excel to generate the HTML, so at least I get partway there. All right, so if you guys have seen my other threat modeling talks or attended my workshops, you'll oftentimes see these spreadsheets that I do. Basically, boil all that down to a sand key diagram to show the threat flow, right? From all these threats to these vulnerabilities, here's the type of controls we put in place to protect these assets. And you can begin to see the flow of that attack and how the stopping power of each control will come into place. Now, a couple of different considerations here. One, non-specific threat intelligence is not intelligence, it's just noise. Without having a good idea of what you're trying to protect and doing those earlier steps, threat intelligence, which everyone is all hyping about, and threat hunting, which everyone's all hyping about, it's fantastic, it's exciting, it's sexy. It takes us away from doing the boring stuff that actually will protect us from a real attack. So we've got to be real careful around non-specific threat intelligence. The other thing is encryption is only effective as the threat's trying to stop. I'm going to show a couple threats and explain how that comes together. But that's very key, right? HTTPS and that locked browser is not going to prevent us from a SQL injection flaw. So it's all threat specific. All that makes sense? Before I get to the encryption, questions on that? Sweet. All right, so let's talk about encryption. Here's example one. We've got some healthcare personnel. They're doing their thing. They're connecting up over the network. We've got some files we got to worry about that are not encrypted. They've got an email system, 2 factors in it, which is great, but there's no encryption in the database. We got an EMR we got to worry about. Everyone who has an EMR, we've got to worry about it. EMRs are terrible. And your data warehouse. These examples I'm showing you, such as this one, are based on real things we see all the time, but not necessarily any one of our customers or any one engagement I've talked to. But just as an example, here's what you see for remote access to a medical system. And by laying it out and looking at the flow, you can say, okay, this is encrypted here, this is clear text, this is, encrypted, unencrypted. This is over SMB, and we know that we can do some SMB replay attacks to get at that. This is encrypted to the email system, but all the storage on the back end is decrypted, with the exception of the data warehouse, where we're doing database encryption. You can begin to lay out and look at each one of the pieces and figure out where you're strong and where you're weak, and again, then apply that to talking about where the attackers would move through the system. A nice thing about this is, it's the next one. I'll get back to that. So when we lay it out, the threat flow looks something like this, right? For our insider attack or our remote attackers, trying to do something like stride, disclosing information, elevating privileges, spoofing identity, taking advantage of misconfigurations. They're going to be stopped with a lot of this network by encrypting that network traffic and by protecting the authentication of it, right? To protect those creds and the infrastructure and the health information. So if we start at that point and just look at the network side, we can cut it that way, show that flow out, and show the stopping power of each one of these things. Now, the other thing you might wonder is, hey, Wolf, when you're showing me vampires and werewolves, lines are the same, we got different bands and thicknesses, right, for these lines? One of the things that we try and show visually is the number of records. So if we take the number of records, multiply it by that dollar value, and figure out the dollar value risk, we increase that band size proportionally. So, for example, if they're getting in and bypassing authentication, maybe they can get a couple records, but if they get in and sniff all the network traffic, they're going to get a significant more amount of records, right? So we can visually show what that risk is. So coming out of this, we can begin to make some suggestions on where to spend and where to make improvements. Looking at the controls, I already listed all these, right? Traffic, data at rest, applications. Seeing that there's weaknesses in the traffic, and there's weaknesses in the databases and the encryption, and then figuring out how to improve the program and coming up with some business cases, in this case for multi-factor and network level encryption. Now you guys might say, that's great, Wolf, but didn't you just say they have an EMR and their EMR is unencrypted, right? Anyone here in healthcare responsible for an EMR? Okay. You guys ever want to freak out someone? They're like, hey, I'm in healthcare and I've just got a new job in IT security. Like, that's great. Have you looked at the EMR? EMRs are like manufacturing systems. They're old, and the security of those systems progresses at a very slow rate. So you end up wrapping a lot of controls around it. And whenever you're in a situation where the vendor isn't going to make the improvement, you don't want to be sitting down at the end of the engagement or at the end of your internal assessment with your boss and going, hey, look, we really need to fix the EMR. And the guy's going to go, yeah, that'll be 10 years. This has been a great job. Good, kudos for you, gold star. Talk to me in 10 years, right? We want to focus in on areas where we really can make solid improvements. And for the technology we just looked at and the controls and the weaknesses, that network level is already there, right? All the technology is there. As they like to say, the inches we need are all around us. We just need to configure it, which is a much easier way to make some good strides and tackle that risk. Next thing is payment systems. Here's an example payment processor. You've got some customers, they're coming in over a firewall. It's unencrypted because that's the old design pattern, right? Decrypt it out to the edge and unencrypt internally. We've got a payment system, so they're doing some shopping and they're storing the payments. The payment system's going down to the payment processor. That's going out to the data warehouse where it's all being stored and whatnot. We've got some authentication and uploading here, and we lay out all the steps as the process goes through that flow. One of the things that was interesting with this type of flow is you can begin, once you map it out, to see the weaknesses and have those conversations. You can basically do paper pen tests. So for example, we're doing one similar to this, and I was looking through it, and the one we were talking to actually had two different legs, one for internal employees and one for external. And I was looking at it, and I'm like, so they're both web. And they're over two different firewalls? Yep. And they're encrypted. Oh, totally encrypted. Okay. What about if he doesn't put in the S? What happens? And it's like, why would anyone do that? I don't know. Let's try. Open up the laptop, try, unencrypted. Then it gets worse. He picks up the phone, he talks to his guy. He's like, hey, the guy, yeah? What if they don't put in the S? And the guy goes, there's an S? So all the employees had a link on their desktop that was HTTP that they're typing in their username and password and doing all the payment information, even though everyone thought it was encrypted. And we were able to find that, right? Paper pen test. At least the fix was easy. Update the links. Everyone just clicks the links. All right. Once you have that, we can begin laying out the model. We can notice, hey, look, the data is not encrypted in the databases. That's going to allow you to get the cardholder data. The active data in files. This is thicker because active data, right? If you capture active data in a payment system, you're going to get every single payment transaction while you're capturing. So think about what happened like with the Target breach, where they were on the point of sale system and collecting all the swipes. We had a similar pen test where we captured an AIX payment processor in the middle stream, and it was just like grabbing credit cards out of memory. You'll only capture stuff when you're in the time period, so it's fewer records. If you get to the database, that's where all the gold is. Network traffic, similar, much fewer, because you're only getting off the traffic off the line. And then, of course, you can do spoofing if you don't have good encryption management. We'll come back to that last one. So from there, we can then say, okay, let's look at our controls. We got some clear weaknesses around how the databases are being protected and the applications are being protected. We got some concerns about key management. We got concerns about how the data is going to that payment processor. And we can begin to talk about making improvements to the application. In this particular case, if you have control of that app, you can do that. It's different than an EMR or off-the-shelf app or cloud app. You have control. You can begin to implement these controls with your development team. You can look at things like tokenization. So the data is, the card itself is an encrypted token that's moving through the system as opposed to the card holder. And you can show graphically the improvement of each one of these things. And again, tie it back to potential data loss and the cost of implementing the controls. All right? And in systems like this, we can begin, if you're in the development side, to talk about encrypting everywhere and decrypting only on use. Some of the best, most secure applications I see, the data is almost never decrypted. It's encrypted the minute it enters the system, and only if they need the social security number do they actually bother decrypting. Only if they need the credit card do they actually bother decrypting. It's encrypted everywhere. And any architect ever is going to say, but if you do that, how am I going to do search? You encrypt your search, and now think about password hashes. Now you're comparing encrypted values for your searches, right? So encrypt it everywhere across the line. I'm going to go really quick on this one because I only got a couple minutes and I'm out of time. But here's an example where you'd encrypt it everywhere. Have your web client, your web server, your app servers, your payment tiers, the whole 9 yards. The big problem then ends up being people trying to brute force passwords or hijack sessions. You can look at your storage layer and figure out what happens at the storage layer and begin to figure out ways that you can move those controls not only encrypt everywhere but closer to the data. So threat specific in terms of what the attackers might do and very data specific in terms of that data element itself. Skip that. Oh, yeah. Encryption, key management. Without encryption, or with encryption without key management, you basically have encoding, right? Because you have the keys, you can decrypt anything. So we're starting to see as more and more people use encryption, the criminals don't give up, right? All controls make better criminals. Criminals don't give up. They're just stealing the keys. So we have the need for better key management. So if we look at encrypting at the data layer, two ways to do this. One is application layer encryption, encrypting the values themselves. So of course, here you got social security number, here you got gobbledygook. And that's like, great, gobbledygook. That gets stolen if SQL injection happens, if anything happens, it's not going to get leaked because it's encrypted and you got good key management behind it. The problem is if you've got a distributed system and they're expecting social security numbers and doing analytics and you're sending the gobbledygook to them, it ends up breaking these distributed systems. If you have an older EMR and you're pulling that out or writing it in, it's going to choke because it's expecting specific key fields. A different way to do this is format preserving encryption, FPE, now a standard. You write it through the API, and it starts out looking like a credit card. It comes out looking like a credit card. Goes in like a social security number, comes out like a social security number. So it still is a valid format. You can still pass it around, but it is also encrypted, so if it does get leaked, you haven't leaked any sensitive data. I like this because it allows us to support all this legacy IT that for the near term we're going to have to worry about. If you lay all this together and start looking at physical storage, virtual storage, right? Lay it all together on one of these diagrams. There's a lot to take in. So you try and break it apart when you have the conversations with the people who can make the change, right? Having the right graph, the right conversation, the right story, the right person who can impact it, and then rolling it all up for you and your team to see big picture. What are the threat flows that we're trying to protect against, and what are the controls we can truly implement? So, as we go towards that data encryption model, right, where it's closer to the data point, if you're encrypting using something like FPE or data-centric encryption, it stays encrypted throughout the entire system, so if the wire gets leaked or the memory in the server gets scraped or any of these things, it's still an encrypted format and it does not escape and does not cause a breach. All right, so next steps, we'll wrap it up. To recap, we want to take a look at the organization's ability to achieve its mission, the technology that enables that mission, and map those things out. We want to go ahead and look at ways that we can find the overlap of what matters to us and what matters to the criminals, right? We want to find the rhino horns in our environment so that we can put the right protections around them before the criminals come in and poach. We can do that with good diagrams, work up to data flow analysis, and then go all the way up to the business process. And this gives us different slices of the data to find different vulnerabilities in people, process, and technology, and different slices of the data to look at it in different ways and communicate to the different decision makers that we all need to get on board to implement any type of control. We can do this with threat flows to show the impact and stopping power of any one particular threat. So, next steps, hey, identify your business activities and identify the threats. It's easy. If you're trying to think about security programs as a discipline, carve out just a little bit of time to start having those conversations with your business units. If nothing else, think about Stephen Covey's seek first, understand, then be understood. The better we can understand those business processes, the better we can improve our security posture, and the more they're going to listen to us. And the first 3 months, a really good process for this, a really good program, would be a continual identification of critical business activities, maybe one a month. Identify those data flows and map it all the way down, and continuous data modeling. Again, maybe one a month. So you're constantly getting better visibility into these two domains. And then finally, within 6 months, have a practice of doing this modeling and have a good discipline so that you can understand the business and the threats better and you can act out of the intersection of both. And then 6 months and 2 days, please send me an email and tell me how you did this. Because we really need good insight and good input from all you guys in the world to make this process work and to get better at securing our organizations. Okay, here's my contact information. You guys want to reach out to me. I know I'm a little bit over time, so thank you very much. I'll be here for the next couple of days if anyone has any questions.